What's going on, Only Playbook fans? We are back. I am Sweetcar. I got Shovit with me. Free agent frenzy is among us in the NFL. Shovit, I can't even keep up with this. That's why I felt like we needed to get on the pod and talk to the people about everything that's happening, all of the changes that are taking place in the landscape of the NFL. How are you doing, my man? How are you able to keep up with all of these transactions?
I know, right, dude? It's crazy. I mean, the Steelers have been making a lot of moves, the Vikings. I'm going to talk about some of the other teams, but it's a lot of stuff. I'm just glad I have all those notifications on my phone from, Ian Rappaport and all those guys. So I get them right away, and I just stop everything that I'm doing. I'm like, what the hell just happened?
What was your initial reaction, which we'll dive into when Deontay Johnson got traded?
Oh man, I was like, money, money, money. We just saved so much, and I was like, thank God, that we paid him a lot of money, and he just wasn't as elite as you want him as a receiver, wide receiver one. I'm ready for George Pickens to pick up the torch and like be that number one guy for Pittsburgh. So I'm excited. Yes, we're losing a big slot piece, but I think that with the draft and maybe hopefully Calvin Austin, and we did get Van Jefferson as well, Marquise Callaway. So we need more pieces, but I'm okay. I'm actually excited about getting rid of Deontay Johnson.
Not the surest of hands, and he goes to a place where the quarterback Bryce Young needs somebody who can get open. So I think it's a good fit, and again, for you guys to shed some salary. But we'll talk a lot more about some of the specifics of it. What I want to do first is I want to run through the quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, and tight ends in terms of signings, all that kind of stuff, just because that's going to be fantasy relevant. We'll touch on some players that we think could be key fantasy players, heading into 2024, and then I want to talk about kind of your biggest free agent winners in terms of teams and your biggest losers, and then I'll give you mine, and then we'll get out of here because we have a lot of wide receiver tape to watch because next week's episode is going to be the wide receivers, and I can't wait. So, all right, bro, let's do the rundown here. So I am going through the PFF's top free agents by position and where they signed. Stop me if you want to talk about any of these players in more detail than I decide to go into, but again, fantasy relevant or not, I want to highlight these. Starting with the quarterback, Shovit, Kirk Cousins, old Kirky boy, leaves Minnesota and he signs with the Atlanta Falcons for the 4-year, $180 million deal. I think this goes without saying. Kirk has always been fantasy relevant, but he's always been fringe. I think with the situation that he's in, could be a time where he becomes a top 10 fantasy quarterback with the weapons around him. But I think bigger than Kirk, all of the teammates of Kirk are going to benefit from this more than Kirk himself. Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, Drake London. So I think there is a big fantasy value shift with the Atlanta Falcons team as a whole, where last year we were debating outside of Bijan, who could you possibly start? You could be looking at this year saying, who can't you start? Because everybody seems startable. Do you have any clearer thoughts on Kirk Cousins going to Atlanta?
No, I think you're right. You hit a nail on. And they also got their offensive coordinator, I think, is Zach Robinson, right? So he's a guy from the LA Rams. So I think that's all going to bode really well for fantasy wise. Yeah, you're right. I think Drake London, if there's a time for him to shine, it's this year. And hopefully that can come into fruition, which I think so. I think it will.
Yeah, I mean, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, the untapped potential. And then you go out and get guys like Darnell Mooney, Rondell Moore to fill out the wide receiver room, right? Take some pressure off of London and Pitts. So
yeah,
I think the weapons are absolutely there for Kirk. And I think that's the biggest kind of the fantasy value is going to be with the rest of the team. Because Kirk is now there and he can actually, get the ball to the weapons. Baker Mayfield stays with Tampa Bay, re-signed. So, not a lot to touch on. Obviously, he makes Mike Evans and those guys fantasy relevant like they were last year. So nothing really changes there. Russell Wilson Shovit signs a 1-year, $1.2 million deal with your Pittsburgh Steelers to, in fact, what seems like be the starting quarterback. They also went out and traded a 6th-round pick for Justin Fields, an absolute steal, might I add, to give up basically nothing for a quarterback that still, you could say has some potential and the future could be bright for him. But what are your thoughts on those two quarterbacks? Do you think it's a Wilson is starting from start to finish, or do you think bringing in Fields creates kind of a conundrum where if you have 2-3 weeks of Wilson not playing well, you're already going to have the fans and everybody, chiming in and saying, bring on Fields, bring on Fields.
With the new offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith, there is a world where Russell Wilson doesn't play to an elite level or good enough to win games. And we're like, hey, let's go out and try put Justin Fields. Now that contract stipulation where you get the draft pick for next year is 4th versus 6th. I think that after week 8, week 9, if Russell Wilson's not doing well, then Justin Fields comes in. And at that point, I think Fields becomes relevant. But to go out and get Fields in the fantasy world, I don't think that's a smart decision, nor do I think Russell Wilson is going to be fantasy relevant on a consistent basis. hopefully the best thing that can come out of this is that Najee, Jalen Warren should be relevant in running back position, Arthur Smith offense, and then hopefully George Pickens becomes takes that next step. But it's there's a lot of uncertainty there, but that's what I'm hoping happens as a fan personally.
Yeah, I mean, Russell Wilson is notorious for being able to throw the deep ball well, right?
Yeah,
And I think when you look at Mason Rudolph, Kenny Pickett, all those guys, that's one thing they struggled with is getting the football down the field. That's where Pickens excels. So you would like to think those things are going to go hand in hand. And like you said, they hold the card, so they can basically do what they want with that situation to make sure that they give back a sixth and not a fourth. So I think that's going to be great. I like the idea of Russell Wilson or of Justin Fields getting to learn behind Russell Wilson, just how to be a consummate professional, right? I mean, take away any of the football stuff, but just how to be a professional. And in this situation, when you're not the guy, right? Russell Wilson last year got benched. It was the first time he's gone through that stuff, so he can learn from the situation. So I do like the fit. I like the 2-quarterback system because you don't really know who's gonna play the best, and I like to keep your options open in a situation where the Steelers really don't have expectations. Like, I don't think anybody's expecting the Steelers to win the Super Bowl this year. I think the expectations are always just 500 or better with Tomlin. So I think you can absolutely attain that with the roster that they currently have.
Hopefully. We'll see.
Another quarterback, Gardner Minshew, gets a starting job with the Las Vegas Raiders, 2 years, $25 million. They had Aiden O'Connell there. I don't really know what this means. It's not a big enough contract where I'm like, yep, Minshew's the guy, right? I mean, training camp could break and Minshew could struggle and O'Connell could have taken the next step. And it's not like he's getting paid a lot of money to where he's forced to be the starter. So I don't know how I really feel about that. I still really feel like the Raiders could be a dark horse to grab a quarterback in the draft too. So I don't necessarily feel like Gardner Minshew is fantasy relevant. I know that's going to impact Devontae Adams, which I don't know that his value rises nor falls based on Gardner Minshew because last year was already pretty tumultuous. He's getting another year older. So if anything, I'm more skeptical on Devontae Adams, and they lost Josh Jacobs. So is that going to put more pressure on Gardner Minshew? When, he's a great backup. He's a good journeyman. He's a good guy to fill in, but is he going to be a guy that starts 17 games for you? Especially again, they lost Josh Jacobs and now they are trusting Zamir White to be the bell cow. So a new running back, basically kind of an unproven quarterback and an aging superstar receiver. So it just doesn't feel like that roster gels. Like the timelines aren't the same for all the players. So it's a little weird. That's why I still feel like they're a dark horse to draft a Penix, draft somebody to sit for a year maybe. So that wouldn't surprise me. But do you like the idea of Gardner Minshew to the Raiders? Are you indifferent about it?
I think it's an upgrade. Yeah. I think from Garoppolo and is it O'Connell, Aiden O'Connell? Yeah, I think it's an upgrade from those guys, and just to kind of take what Michael Pittman did with the Colts last year, fantasy kind of relevant. Devontae Adams is a better receiver, so I wouldn't be nervous about drafting him. I feel like you can still draft him late first round, second round next year, and I think you can expect better production. Zamir White is going to be a guy that you need to look into. I think that he maybe is going to be fitting into what Josh Jacobs was. I would be inclined to kind of look to see where I can get him and see if he can be on my fantasy team as well within the right price. So yeah, I mean, I'm more optimistic about this signing because I think it's an upgrade from what they had.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think you're right. I think the Zamir White fantasy year could be massive just because, again, he's the guy. They're trusting him to be the guy.
Right.
And you have a young quarterback, Gardner Minshew. I mean, it's not a guy that you're like, go out there and sling it and win us the game, right? So I think they're still going to rely on the run game. So Zamir White, I think, is the biggest benefactor from the whole Gardner Minshew situation to the Raiders.
Yeah.
Jacoby Brissett signs a 1-year deal with the New England Patriots. Interesting. Brissett's the consummate professional. He's a backup. He's really a bridge guy. Patriots are drafting third. So the idea is you sign Brissett and you're hoping that he can start this year and the rookie quarterback can sit behind him for a year. A good guy to learn from. So I don't really make a ton of fantasy relevance from Brissett. I don't think you're starting him. The Patriots are going to be one of the worst teams in football. So I don't see a world where there's a lot of fantasy value in anybody on that team. Maybe the running back situation, but now Ramondre, I believe, is splitting carries because I forget who they signed. They signed another running back, but I cannot think of it off the top of my head. But with Ramondre no longer being the bell cow Antonio Gibson. Yes, Antonio Gibson. And Ramondre's value came from pass catching, and that's the only value that Gibson brings. So I think you're in a world where neither running back is going to assume the responsibilities to be the guy, and I mean, I don't know. Are you going to start KJ Osborne as a receiver? I don't think so. So I think Jacoby Brissett there is truly a bridge. I think they're going to draft a rookie quarterback. I wouldn't be surprised if that rookie quarterback starts before the end of the season.
I saw this tweet that said like, well, how could you get rid of KJ Osborne? He was like the best locker room guy on that team or something. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I didn't think I didn't think that was enough of a reason to have to keep KJ Osborne.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even
Yeah.
have any words for that. I've never once heard KJ Osborne being the listen, if you're not a great football player, the only way you can belong is to be a good locker room guy, right?
Sure.
Like that's your sell. So if that's kind of what he's holding on to, sure. But there's plenty of guys who are actually proven players and locker room guys that I think are going to supersede KJ Osborne's departure.
Yeah.
So I'm not really worried about that. Jameis Winston signs with the Cleveland Browns, 1 year deal, $4 million. He's going to be the backup there to Deshaun Watson. Not much to make there. Tyrod Taylor signs to be a backup with the New York Jets behind Aaron Rodgers. Sam Darnold, 1 year, $10 million with the Minnesota Vikings. Shove it. This is important because they don't have a quarterback right now. Kirk's gone. So it seems like Sam Darnold's going to be the starter. The expectation is we're going into the draft, expecting the Vikings to pick up a quarterback, but with what Darnold being the 1 year bridge, depending on the quarterback they get, they have the ability to sit him, to nurture him, to have him learn behind Darnold, and then plop him when he's ready. Unless again Darnold becomes absolutely abysmal and you're forced your hand at that situation. But with how he played with the Panthers to end the year and the 49ers, I think Darnold really can be the bridge guy, as long as the expectation for Vikings fans isn't that he's supposed to win us a ton of games, because that's not realistic. But I don't shy away from Justin Jefferson. I don't shy away from TJ Hawkinson. I don't shy away from Aaron Jones, who they signed, just because Sam Darnold's not a great quarterback. I think in this system, the whole aspect is that Kevin O'Connell's putting Nick Mullins out there to throw for 450 yards and have Justin Jefferson's best game. I think Sam Darnold can do the same. So I'm not worried about it from a fantasy perspective, but I don't think Sam Darnold's fantasy relevant.
Right. I agree.
Drew Lock signs with the Giants. This was an interesting one because I don't know if you watched the press conference, but it felt like Drew Lock was told something and then he was told to say something different publicly, right? Like it was almost like he was told that he was going to compete for the job because the Giants don't buy in on Daniel Jones. But when he was at the press conference, he was like, yeah, I'm going to come here and be the backup. Because I don't know. I just felt like he was fumbling his words during the interview, to where I was like, did they tell you that you're competing, but you're over here having to tell them you're not competing to save face? That's kind of the vibes I got. And Daniel Jones isn't like, he's basically under contract for 1 more year. So there's no guarantee that he's locked up that role. Drew Lock's been a guy that's bounced around now. Everybody thought he was going to be a first round prospect, wasn't drafted in the 2nd round. So people feel like there's still some potential, if you will, there. Do you view this as a threat to Daniel Jones at all?
I don't. I think the only threat to Daniel Jones is Daniel Jones himself, right? Like if he doesn't play well, then maybe, but I don't think that going into training camp, there shouldn't be a battle between Drew Lock and Daniel Jones for the QB1 position. I think it's still Daniel Jones' job to lose sometime in the season if he's not playing well.
Yeah. I agree with you. The Browns not only brought in Jameis Winston, but they also brought in Tyler Huntley. So contingent plans should Deshaun Watson just fall off the face of the earth or do some more inappropriate things that get him suspended. So it's nice to have those insurance plans in place. And now they not only have one, they have two. So Tyler Huntley and Jameis Winston. So the Browns quarterback room should be an interesting one. Josh Dobbs signs a 1 year deal with the San Francisco 49ers. So looks like the 49ers and the Vikings traded backup quarterbacks with Sam Darnold and Josh Dobbs. Mason Rudolph, your boy, is now a Tennessee Titan. He's going to back up Will Levis. Another situation where maybe he's competing for the starting job because, does Will Levis really have it locked down? But I wouldn't really put much stock into Mason Rudolph.
Did you see what Tom Brady said? Tom Brady was like, Will Levis is playing better than I was at that age. So he's got a lot of faith in Will Levis, it seems like. Let's see.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people were probably playing better than Tom Brady at that age because Tom Brady was a 6th round pick and wasn't very good to start out. So contextually, it doesn't mean as much as, what we think it does. The GOAT saying he's playing better than him, but who knows? Josh Johnson re-signs with the Ravens, backup Lamar Jackson, and then Sam Howell, already given up by the Commanders. He has been traded to the Seattle Seahawks. So that's it for quarterback. Shove it. Let's run through the running backs real quick. Running backs are going to have a lot more fantasy implications, but I want to save the deep dives into when we really dive into the fantasy landscape. Real quickly, Saquon Barkley is the name of the game. He's the biggest name. He goes to the Philadelphia Eagles on a 3-year, $37.5 million contract. Obviously, fantasy relevant from day one. I think Saquon's going to be a first-round pick, maybe a fringe first round, like a second round at that turn, but I don't think his value really dwindles. If anything, it gets better because the offensive line is better, the offense is better, and Saquon was inefficiently still being a good fantasy producer. So I think with the Philadelphia Eagles, he's only going to get better. Josh Jacobs to the Green Bay Packers shove it. This was kind of a shock to me. A guy who was incredibly inefficient as a runner, 2 years removed from, having the rushing record for the NFL or leading the league in rushing, but also did that inefficiently. So I would say volume is what really Josh Jacobs is all about. So I do like the aspect that you have a young running back, or you have a young quarterback and young receivers. So having a veteran running back to sometimes, if he needs to carry the ball 30 to 35 times, it's the right infrastructure to do that. But at the same time, I like that the Packers were so young, and I just don't know that Josh Jacobs was necessary. So I don't know. I felt really indifferent about it. The money was okay. He got paid. He was the second highest paid running back, I would say, 4 years, $48 million, even though I don't think it's, the way it's structured is not full year, $48 million. But even despite that, does that come as a surprise to you that he's going to Green Bay? How do you like that fit?
Yeah, I mean, they are no longer going with Aaron Jones, going with Josh Jacobs, and I think it'll be interesting to see. I think that there is a world where Josh Jacobs can be relevant in terms of fantasy. I wouldn't hate signing him. I think that the Packers offense as a whole has a lot of weapons. So being able to utilize Josh Jacobs with the receiving core that they already have, I actually like this pick, and I think that there is a world where Josh Jacobs can be relevant this year. I can't say where his ADP third round, fourth round.
Yeah, I'd probably say
Probably
second or third round is
second and
where I'd be
third is
looking at. Yeah.
probably where it would be. So yeah, I think he'll be relevant.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like he's the kind of guy that teams just run till his wheels fall off. So
right.
if Green Bay is basically, they let go of Aaron Jones and they said, we're bringing back AJ Dillon. So if they watched AJ Dillon as much as we watched AJ Dillon, I would expect Josh Jacobs to touch the football 300 times. Derrick Henry, another big name. He is going to the Baltimore Ravens. I think this is a fantastic fit. The Thunder and Lightning, the true Thunder and Lightning with him and Keaton Mitchell, man, that's going to be incredible. The Thunder and Lightning with him and Lamar Jackson even would be incredible. So I think this is going to be a great fit. They don't have to have him run the ball 300 times because they have Keaton Mitchell and they have Lamar Jackson. So truly, you can maximize Derrick Henry. You can limit his touches, give him the important touches. And again, he's just such a bruiser in this run game. Like, imagine a read option. How are you determining who to stop, Derrick Henry or Lamar Jackson? I just think that's a lose-lose recipe for defenses.
This one is a little bit more tough for me to go out and say I would go out and get Derrick Henry. I know a lot of people on on Twitter may be inclined to, but I think that given that Lamar Jackson runs the ball a lot, he takes away from Derrick Henry, and I feel like Derrick Henry, how many reps do you think he'll see, and how consistent do you think he'll be from week 1 to week 17? So for that reason, I would probably be a little bit afraid. He's like, what, I forget what his age is, but he's getting up there.
He's 29. I think he's going to turn 30.
29. Yeah. So like with that being said, I could see him being like he'll score touchdowns. I just don't know if you can get that week in, week out. So I'd be a little bit worried to get Derrick Henry for the right price, obviously, but he worries me more than Josh Jacobs does.
I agree. I definitely think Josh Jacobs is, by nature, just volume he's going to produce, right? He's their guy, so he's going to get the football, which means he's going to produce. Different for sure with Derrick Henry, where, again, they're going to minimize how they use him because they want to, maximize when he's touching the football, that, he's maximizing his energy and potential. And that's why I think it's perfect, because, again, you have Keaton Mitchell, who's so freaking fast and electric and explosive. You have, obviously, Lamar Jackson, right? So even just a backfield where Keaton Mitchell and Derrick Henry are both lined up, like, if you don't account for Henry's bruiser mentality, Keaton Mitchell is going to hit the corner and he's gone for 90 yards, right? Mm-hmm. And so I just think it's a solid fit, but you're right. We've waited 2-3 years for the wheels to fall off with King Henry, that it could happen at any time, and I wouldn't be surprised. And similar to, I don't know if was he not on here? Well, I guess I'll talk about it right now. Aaron Jones going from the Packers to the Vikings. People would forget Aaron Jones is also 29. He's about to turn 30 before the football league year starts, right? So the age cliff for running backs, when we talked to Tej last year, and the metrics and the stats supported the age 27 is when people fall off. So these guys are way past the 27 age threshold, right? So they are anomalies, which means it's a matter of time before that cliff happens. And because 27 is so far removed now, I feel like that cliff could be just deeper when it happens or when it comes. So that's the fear. And I feel like I have that fear less with Henry, just because they can be smart about how they use him. But like Aaron Jones to the Vikings, they have him and Ty Chandler, right? I mean, Ty Chandler can't pass protect. So I expect Aaron Jones to play a lot, and age 29 for a running back is just not a great age for a running back. So the age thing is the only thing that has me worried. But Aaron Jones, I think, like the last 6 games last year, was averaging over 5 yards a carry, and he's averaged over 5 yards a carry his entire career. So if he maintains that production, then we have a absolute home run of a signing with the Vikings. Yeah. Tony Pollard with the Tennessee Titans. So he goes there on 3 years, $24 million. Him and Tajay Spears, I guess lightning and lightning, thunder and thunder, whatever you want to call that. I don't really know how I feel about that one. That one doesn't feel like the best fit, but somebody had to go there and play running back alongside Tajay Spears because Henry wasn't coming back. So it became Tony Pollard. Austin Eckler signs with the Commanders on a 2-year, $11 million deal. They lose Antonio Gibson, right? So he kind of comes in and becomes the third down back. It's discouraging for Brian Robinson because it felt like last year he was finally coming into his own and like assuming that backfield. Antonio Gibson was limiting his touches. Brian Robinson was actually catching passes, which he's never done. But now I have to believe that Brian Robinson's going to be like the first and second down guy, and Eckler's going to take every passing down work, right? I mean, he's also probably going to take some running down work, but he's probably most likely going to take every passing down work. So it's a situation where you're going to have a young quarterback, you're going to have an aging running back who only really catches passes, and then you're going to have Brian Robinson. So not a situation that I personally would want to get into fantasy-wise this year.
Yeah, I agree, and I think Eckler has lost a step personally.
For sure.
I think that last year was signs of that. His age is certainly a factor. 2 years, $11.43 million. Like if you look at some of the other signings and how much they get paid, Eckler is on the bottom end of all that, and I think that money part has a lot to do with fantasy as well. So split carries with Brian Robinson. So yeah, definitely I would stay away from having Eckler on my team.
Yeah. Speaking of splitting carries, the Bears bring in DeAndre Swift for a 3-headed backfield, 3 years, $24 million deal. They drafted Roshan Johnson last year. They still have Khalil Herbert. So I don't want any part of that backfield personally. Devin Singletary goes to the Giants on a 3-year deal. So they lose Barkley. They bring in Singletary. I really like the way Singletary ran last year. Ran hard, played well, earned that job, and kind of won the starting role over Dameon Pierce, right, with the Texans. So he's been a little bit under the radar, underrated. Obviously, it's not Saquon. And if Saquon was ineffective and inefficient, at least behind the Giants' offensive line, I worry about Devin Singletary. But if Daniel Jones is healthy and they, utilize the read option game, there is a world where he could be a fringe RB2 flex play in fantasy football. Gus Edwards leaves the Ravens because they got Derrick Henry, and now he is with the LA Chargers. The LA Chargers lose Eckler. They bring in Gus Edwards. Jim Harbaugh's there, and they, Harbaugh loves to run the football. So if anything, Gus Edwards, who has no value pass catching, I think his value actually increased going to the Chargers because they lost Eckler. They know Harbaugh's going to want to run the football. They have no wide receivers, basically. So I think Gus Edwards actually put himself in a better situation than he was before. What do you think there?
You know what? I'm not really sure. I think we have to wait till it plays out, training camps and things like that. I just know Edwards shows up one week, doesn't, and then it's like he's always been in the Ravens situation. You have all these different running backs. He looks like he's primed to be the RB1, but I think that let's see who they draft as well. They may even target a running back, and that may change the outcome here.
Maybe Joshua Kelly finally actually wins a starting job.
Maybe. Well, that's probably unlikely.
Yeah, probably unlikely. Sorry, Joshua. AJ Dillon, like I mentioned, re-signed with the Packers, going to be the backup probably there, or dual threat or 2-headed running back there. Zach Moss. We talked about we didn't talk about Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon actually went to the Texans in a trade. So Zach Moss comes in and now is with the Cincinnati Bengals. Moss ran well for the Colts in Jonathan Taylor's absence, still young. So I like that addition for the Bengals. I don't think they lose much because Mixon was losing a step, incredibly inefficient. He was also a guy that was volume dependent. So if Moss seems the same volume as Mixon, I think the production is going to be there, if not maybe better.
That might actually be a 50-50 with him, and there's a running back, Chase Brown, right? So Chase Brown is that I think he was a rookie last year, so he's a guy that definitely needs to be on everyone's radar. It's not one of those things where Zach Moss is coming in and can for sure be the RB1. So that's where I would probably be a little bit hesitant on saying Zach Moss is going to be the lead horseman for your fantasy team.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think he'll be the RB1 there. I think Chase Brown will probably take catching passes or third down work away from him for sure. And Chase Brown's young, right? So is there a world where the Bengals view him as the RB of the future and slowly start to integrate him? Maybe. I also thought that would happen last year. with
Yeah.
Mixon getting older and being inefficient, and it really kind of didn't. So if Chase Brown steps up, great. If he takes the leap, I just think Zach Moss has done enough in the league that, they probably weren't going to
Agreed.
pay him. They weren't going to pay him, 2 years, $8 million to come in and probably be the backup. So we'll see. But right now I would say I'm leaning Zach Moss as RB1 there. Antonio Gibson, we mentioned, signed with the Patriots. DJ Dallas signs with the Arizona Cardinals. Don't really care about that. Depth piece there. Other running backs that still haven't found a home: J.K. Dobbins, Dante Foreman, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So names to keep an eye on. If they go into a backfield where they could split touches, that becomes fantasy relevant because there's implications there. But the names themselves aren't sexy, to say the least, in terms of what's left out there for running backs. Let's jump into the receivers real quick. T. Higgins, I mentioned it, franchise tag by the Bengals, so he's coming back there. Pittman coming back to the Colts. Evans coming back to the Bucks. The players that aren't coming back to their old teams: Hollywood Brown goes to the Kansas City Chiefs.
Basically, this is great for the Chiefs. This is really good. They have Rashee Rice as a receiver. Kelsey is there. But anytime you have a threat with Patrick Mahomes, I think that receiver is going to thrive. And, Hollywood Brown certainly can thrive in the Chiefs world.
Yeah, a guy who can run good routes, get open. That's kind of what Patrick Mahomes would want, right? So
Right.
I think that is a good match made, as long as Hollywood Brown is not injury prone. He was hurt last year. I believe he was dealing with like an heel injury, which for a receiver who breaks in and out of routes, probably not the best thing. But if he's healthy, I do think obviously something to keep an eye on. Anytime a receiver gets added to Patrick Mahomes, you have to keep an eye on it, right? Because there is potential there. Calvin Ridley leaves the Falcons and he gets absolutely paid by the Tennessee Titans. 4 years and $92 million deal for the Titans, who, now have Nuke Hopkins. They have Treylon Burks. Calvin Ridley comes in here. I'm personally of the opinion that I will not draft Calvin Ridley this year. Will Levis as the quarterback. Too much uncertainty around Will Levis. Too many other receivers there. And I personally did not like the way Calvin Ridley was even playing football last year. So I know he was rusty coming off 2 years of not playing ball. Maybe that had something to do with it. But do you have a different opinion on Calvin Ridley?
No, I think you're right on that assessment. I don't remember what the pass attempts for Will Levis was, but I don't remember it being like super high. So I feel like they were still a running team. It's going to be interesting. It's a new team, new coach. So let's see what they end up doing. I mean, on paper, like Calvin Ridley and Hopkins, and that sounds really elite. If the quarterback, if Will Levis plays in a high level, right? So that sounds good, but I understand the reservation. So it's all going to probably boil down to Will Levis. I'm not really sure. I have to look into this more before I say where I would draft Calvin Ridley.
Yeah, I just think that's a lot of money for a guy who was very inconsistent, right? $92 million over 4 years. But we'll see. They had money to give and they needed weapons. Yeah, it's the right idea to surround young quarterbacks with playmakers, right? So I'm not going to fault them on that. I just think it was an overpay for Calvin. They could have drafted a cheaper receiver. They could have probably signed a receiver that's probably similar in playability and not paid that much, but it is what it is.
Yeah, and wasn't this more than what AJ Brown was requesting before he got traded? So
yes,
certainly a downgrade from AJ Brown.
Hindsight's 2020, right?
Yeah. Agreed.
Darnell Mooney goes to the Falcons, 3 year, $39 million. Going to play alongside London and all those boys with Kirk Cousins. I don't really think he's very fantasy relevant. Could have some boom weeks, but not anybody I'm going to play week in and week out. Gabe Davis also goes to the Jags. So they lose Ridley. They sign Gabe Davis. One of the weirdest signings where I don't know how to feel. Like, it feels very lateral. Also feels maybe like worse, but in some ways, could it be better? Because Calvin was kind of underwhelming. It almost seems like a very lateral move. I can't get myself excited about it whatsoever.
Yeah, I agree. I think that check down Trevor Lawrence. I don't know if that's his nickname, but it seems like he checks downs all the time. They've got some threats with Etienne. Christian Kirk is certainly still the wide receiver one. Zay Jones, a lot of mouths to be fed. Gabe Davis may have boom weeks. I think he's one of those guys that's going to have like maybe 30 points one game and then he just doesn't show up. So just the inconsistency factor is why he wouldn't be drafted as high as someone would have him, I guess.
So similar to how he played in Buffalo is kind of how you envision his season to go with the Jags, boom or bust.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know why it would be any difference, right? Like,
yeah, no.
Calvin Ridley was Calvin Ridley kind of was like the same thing as well. So I don't know why I would expect anything different here.
You're right. I don't expect anything different. Odell Beckham's still a free agent. Tyler Boyd's still a free agent who has been linked to the Steelers quite a bit. So that'll be interesting to see if they bring him in as a veteran presence. Curtis Samuel is the Gabe Davis replacement. 3 years, $24 million with the Buffalo Bills. Curtis Samuel's been an underrated receiver, in my opinion. The fact that he was getting more touches, more looks than Jahan Dotson, than Terry McLaurin. out of the slot, the guy can get open and the guy can make plays with the ball in his hands. So I think it's a good fit for the Buffalo. They need more weapons. We don't even know what the situation with Diggs looks like right now. So I don't hate Curtis Samuel there as a wide receiver 2. Kendrick Bourne re-signs with the Patriots, 3 years, $19.5 million. Same team. Who the hell's the quarterback? So, really no feelings there. KJ Osborne signed with the Patriots. Same thing, middling receiver. I don't really know what the value is. He comes in there potentially being their wide receiver 1, but I don't think he's good enough to be a wide receiver 1, and they don't even have a quarterback to throw him the football. So not a world where I'm drafting KJ Osborne personally. Do you think you would draft KJ Osborne?
I would not draft KJ Osborne.
Okay. Noah Brown, 1 year, comes back to the Texans as their wide receiver 3. Cedric Wilson signs with the Saints on a 2-year deal. Marquez Valdez-Scantling is still a free agent. Braxton Berrios re-signs with the Dolphins. Donovan Peoples-Jones re-signs with the Detroit Lions. Matt Collins comes to Buffalo on a 1-year deal. Devin Duvernay, the Jacksonville Jaguars bring him in because it seems like definitely a Jaguars thing to do. Bring a receiver who doesn't play receiver all that well to play receiver. Maybe he's gonna return kicks for them. If that's the case, that's okay. Some other receivers that are free agents, Deontay Johnson, we mentioned it, traded to the Panthers. I think this is a fantastic trade for both sides. Like you said, Steelers shed salary, and Bryce Young desperately needs a guy who can just get open, and Deontay Johnson can get open. So I think that's a good trade for them. Ray McLeod was an ex-Steeler. He now signs with the Falcons. Not much to say about that. Trent Sherfield signs with the Vikings. Probably a depth piece there. So some wide receivers, Michael Thomas, Josh Reynolds, Chase Claypool, Byron Pringle, Quez Watkins, not really important guys, but those guys are still free agents. And with a wide receiver class that's going to be insane this year, the wide receiver landscape post-draft is drastically going to change in fantasy. So we will be all over that to discuss. Real quick, let's highlight the tight ends, and then we can get out of here talking about, our winners and losers in free agency. Tight ends, Dalton Schultz, back with the Texans. Hunter Henry, back with the Patriots. Noah Fant, back with the Seahawks. Gerald Everett leaves the Chargers, and the Bears bring him in on 2 years, $12 million. They still have Cole Kmet, so I don't know if they're going to run a lot of, 11, 12 personnel, what their thoughts are there. But they brought in Keenan Allen. They have DJ Moore. They potentially may draft another receiver with the 9th pick. So it seems like they're building the room with a bunch of weapons for Caleb Williams because Justin Fields is gone. Sorry, Bears fans who still thought that they were going to keep Justin Fields. That was just not a realistic scenario. Colby Parkinson to the Rams, Adam Troutman to the Broncos, Austin Hooper to the Patriots, Gesicki to the Bengals. Kind of interesting, but not really. Irv Smith to the Chiefs. We've been waiting for 4 years for that guy to stay healthy because the possibilities are endless, but they're not because he can't stay healthy. And then Jonnu Smith. That's an interesting one. 2 years, $10 million to the Dolphins. So tight end landscape didn't change a whole lot. I don't know that there's a bunch of fantasy value that changed. Same teams re-signing same guys and not big names going to other places. So don't feel really one way or the other with the tight end landscape changing. But with that being said, that was all the quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, and tight ends that have changed teams, at least most of them up until this point. If we miss some, forgive me. I am not perfect. But Shovit, what team was your biggest free agent winner?
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of teams that made changes, trades. I think Steelers did a very good job with the Vikings as well. But the biggest improvement, I think, was from the Philadelphia Eagles. Not only do they sign Saquon Barkley to make that offense that much better, right? Like, think about it. Jalen Hurts, Saquon, you've got A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith. I mean, Dallas Goedert. Already that offense is elite. But with Saquon Barkley, they get even that much better. And Devontae Parker added as a third piece for the receivers. That's good as well. But I think their biggest additions, improvements also come from the defensive side. So they get a guy named Bryce Huff from the New York Jets, which he's a really good defensive end, I believe. So he finished with 10 sacks, led the league in 21.8 pressure rate last year. So I think that complement that with Jordan Davis, Josh Sweat, they're going to be a pass rushing unit that is going to be scary for the NFL. And I think that they need to get back to that. That's what they were in the Super Bowl, that really good defense. And they lost that last year. So I think that was a great addition. Also, safety CJ Gardner-Johnson is back to the Eagles. That's a huge addition because the Eagles were second to last in passing touchdowns and also in passing yards allowed. So they need that safety help. And one good thing about CJ Gardner-Johnson, I don't know if you saw any of his articles or his press conference, but he's changing his number from number 23 to number 8, quoting Kobe Bryant. Yep,
I saw that.
He says so they're bringing their Mamba. He's bringing his Mamba game on. So I think the Eagles are are one of the most complete teams on offense and defense. They've got some linebacker situation that they need to address. They lost Jason Kelsey. They need to address that. But they're set up to get the right players in the draft. If they get
Mhm.
that right, then they're going to be a scary team to go against, and Super Bowl contenders with the roster that they have. And they have money with all these signings, 28 million in cap space. So they're just making all the right decisions to set them up for the next year. So really good free agency for the Eagles.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Jason Kelsey's replacement's already on the roster. Cam
Yeah,
Jurgens, who was the center, I believe he's going to step in. He fits that mold. Obviously, it's hard to replace basically the best center of all time, but I think that's the plan. I think what they are going to have to address in the draft is the cornerback room, because Darius Slay, like, he's a stud,
true.
but he's getting so old. He's getting very old. I don't even know if they have is. I don't even know if Bradbury's still
Bradbury's
under contract.
still
He
on
is.
their
Okay,
team.
but
Yeah,
he was getting shit on last year, right? So
yeah,
we went from looking at this cornerback duo being like the two best cornerbacks in the league in a 1-2 pairing to these guys hitting a wall and dropping off drastically. So I think they need a young cornerback to come in there. They still keep these guys as vets to, work with, groom, and mold these young guys. But I think they need to have what they do with their defensive line shove it, where they will, funnel in the new guy, and then they'll still have the veterans there to teach them. The veterans will leave, and then the new guys will replace. That's what they need to do with the cornerbacks right now. They need to bring in a
right.
couple of cornerbacks, have Bradbury and Slay groom these guys, and then those guys are out and these guys fill their shoes. So I'm with you. The Eagles are always going to be competitive when their offense is this good, when they have Jalen Hurts. But to add Saquon Barkley to a
Dude,
team that already has that, just on paper feels scary as hell.
yeah. What are they, like, squat 1,200 pounds all together, right? Like, that's a
Bro,
lot of leg.
Saquon and Jalen can probably squat more than you, me, and Shashot combined.
Easy,
All
easily.
of our body weights combined, plus what we could squat each. Combine all of those numbers, and Barkley and Jalen Hurts can still squat more than that. So yeah, that is insane. If you're actually talking about players who are putting the team literally on their back,
Yeah,
bro, for
yeah.
the tush push,
The
how
tush
is it?
push.
How could the
Oh,
tush push get better? Oh, bring in a running back that squats as much as the quarterback does. That's insane. So I'm with you. I think that's a big win. It's not just a flashy name signing. I just think where Saquon's at, what he wants to accomplish. He wants to win. He's in an environment now where the Eagles are going to be competitive, and he gets to stick it to the man. He gets to play the Giants twice a year. So
yeah.
I think it's going to be a fantastic year for the Eagles. My winners, I had two that I couldn't decide between. I think the Texans are one of the biggest free agent winners this year. You lose Devin Singletary, but you replace him with Joe Mixon. You bring back Noah Brown on that 1-year contract. You still obviously have Nico and Tank Dell. You brought back Dalton Schultz, right? So what you did right there already is you fortified the offense. You have your playmakers. You've replaced the running back. When you lost a running back, you brought your tight end back. So all of a sudden, already CJ Stroud has the weapons to work with. Now, on the defensive side, you lose Jonathan Grenard. You lose Blake Cashman. But what'd you do? You went out and got Daniil Hunter, who is arguably the best edge on the market. And then you brought in Azeez Al-Shaair to play linebacker and replace Blake Cashman. So I think Al-Shaair might be an all-pro. I know Daniil Hunter's a pro bowler. I'll say 2 pro bowlers, 2 really, really good players at their position, not to mention defensive lineman Danico Autry. So you really fortified that defensive line. You brought back all of your playmakers on offense, and you brought in Jeff Okudah, who I'm not super crazy about, but they need some help in the cornerback room. I just think this franchise, the way they're positioned right now, CJ Stroud is only getting better. So if they add one more weapon, like imagine adding a really fast wide receiver in the draft that can take the top off the defenses, and then everything else that you do, you can just address the defensive side of the football.
Yeah.
Everything else, their offensive line is set, their quarterback is set, their 3 receivers are set, right? So everything else can be addressed on the defensive side. D'Amico Ryans is going to have a field day with this draft, right? So I think everything they've done, they've set themselves up really, really nicely. It was a surprise with how good they were last year, but now with the roster, that's kind of the expectation. Now you have CJ Stroud and you have this roster. Sorry that you were so good your first year. Now your second year, you have to be that at least or better. So I think they did a really good job of fortifying what they already had, replacing what they lost, and then adding really, really impact players to key positions. Daniil Hunter is a little bit older than Jonathan Grenard, but Daniil Hunter is better than Jonathan Grenard, right? So I just think the window that they're in, it's a perfect fit. I really, really liked what the Texans did.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that, like, they already had a good offense that was successful, and CJ Stroud is starting to become the real deal. So a lot of teams, I feel like, what differentiates them is not only just addressing the needs that you have, but addressing needs with, like, potential Pro Bowlers, right?
Mhm.
Daniel Hunter, Alshire. So like being able to get the best players to fit those needs. I just look at the Steelers and I'm like, yeah, you guys got, you get Dante Jackson, you get quarterback like Russell Wilson Fields, but did you really get the best players for you to be successful? And I feel like the Texans did a really good job on that. So kudos to them for sure.
Yeah. So I stand corrected. Alshire has not been into a Pro Bowl or an All Pro, but he is a heck of a football player. So probably something in his future. But again, I love what the Texans did. Young football team, made a bunch of moves, and I think the future is bright. Real quickly, I do want to highlight the second team that I really love, the Panthers. Want to give them their kudos, trading for Deontay Johnson. Everything they did that they tried to do this year for the most part was to put a plan in place for Bryce Young to be successful in year 2. You go out and get Deontay Johnson, a guy that's going to absolutely get open for Bryce Young. You go out and you get an offensive tackle. I forget his name, Nijman, I believe. Robert Hunt, a guard. You get another guard, Damian Lewis. So you literally got 3 guys on the offensive line. You went out and you got a receiver. So Bryce Young is protected and he's got a number 1 option, right? That's
Right.
all you can ask for. Now you go out into the draft, you get with your 33rd pick, you draft another receiver, and then everything else. Like I think I told you this offseason or early in the offseason, because you're going to year 2 of Bryce and year 1 was such a disaster. Almost everything you do in the draft and free agency should be to help Bryce Young, right? And not only did they do that, they brought in Ashawn Robinson on the defensive side. They brought in DJ Wanham. They brought in Josie Jewell. They brought in Dane Jackson. So they didn't only fortify the offense, they fortified their defense as well. So I think you can truly go into the draft saying, I want to get as many weapons, as much protection, as much as we can do to make Bryce's life easier. And I think year 2 is going to look a lot different than year 1. So everybody that's a Panthers fan, everybody that, wrote Bryce off already, let's give him a year with an actual team before we, decide to write that man off.
Yep.
What about Shove It, your biggest loser? Who is your biggest loser? The team that we're going to make fun of the most, the team that we're going to put in caps on all of our social media. I'm going to at their franchise. I'm going to at all their fan base. Who is the biggest loser in all of football?
I don't want to make fun of them, but they just always put themselves in scenarios like this. The Dallas Cowboys, man, they're my biggest losers. For 3 days, all these teams are making all these changes and free agency trades, and we hear nothing from the Dallas Cowboys. All we hear are the players that they lost. So I'll just list them here. Tony Pollard that we talked about. They lose Doris Armstrong. They lose their center, 2022 Pro Bowler Tyler Biadasz. They lose Tyron Smith, a left tackle. They had a couple of re-signings here and there of the players that they had, like 3 of them that I haven't listed here. But the only good thing that they did was they signed Eric Kendricks. So kudos to them.
Good? Is that good?
Yeah, he still had like 77 high 70s tackles last year, and he was going to the 49ers. And I think that the influence that Mike Zimmer had brought him from the 49ers to the Cowboys. But I don't think that they had enough needle movers to be able to be better than the team that they were last year. They're losing a lot, and now they're having to play catch up, right? So they have $7 million in cap space if they follow the top 51 rule of the salary cap, but they'll have to address everything in the draft. And if they don't, then there's just not going to be they're losing too much that I don't think that their backups can take over. I mean, they obviously still have Parsons on the team. Dak's still there, CD's still there, but still, I just don't think they're making themselves better to have a better outcome than they did last year. So they're the Dallas Cowboys. They're the biggest losers in free agency thus far.
Yeah, I agree with you. They were a layup, and that's why I figured you would take them. So it's obvious. Like, how does the owner come in and say we're gonna do everything, or what did he say? I forget what the quote was, but Jerry Jones before free agency came out and said something like, we are going to do everything. And then literal crickets, right? Like absolutely nothing. You lose everybody. Yeah, you bring back Kendricks, but was that Jerry Jones? Was that Mike Zimmer being like, I want my guy? So Jerry Jones realistically has done absolutely nothing. So I think it's going to be a weird year for the Cowboys where you went from, what did they win? 12 games last year almost, to probably not making the playoffs. And it's going to be one of those where I truly think like the franchise and the team and the roster is going to turn over within the next year and a half dramatically. Like, I don't think Dak will still be there. So I don't know, man. I mean, they obviously have some young, nice guys to build around. CeeDee Lamb, you have Trayvon Diggs, you have those guys you have Micah Parsons, obviously, but outside of that, like, the expectation can't be the same when you're doing nothing. Like you're doing nothing and you're expecting different results. Jerry Jones is doing absolutely nothing, and he thinks that he's going to go in next year expecting to win the championship. So I agree with you. The Cowboys were one of the biggest losers, but I actually ended up picking a different team. The Buffalo Bills were my biggest loser. Shove similar situation, a team that, has a franchise quarterback that should be competing every year. Is in a win now window. At least we thought they were for the last 3 years. They lose their center, Mitch Morse, who goes to the Jaguars. They lose their defensive end, Leonard Floyd, who goes to the 49ers. They lose safety Jordan Poyer, who goes to the Dolphins. They lose wide receiver Gabe Davis, who goes to the Jaguars. They lose cornerback Tre'Davious White. Who did they gain? They gained cornerback Taron Johnson, I guess, solid replacement. And then wide receivers Curtis Samuel and Matt Collins. Outside of that, the team has not gotten any better. They haven't made any changes. And it's one of those things where you have a franchise quarterback. Every year that you have Josh Allen, you should be doing everything in your power to try to win. And again, you're in a conference where there are so many good teams that are led by so many good quarterbacks that if you're just resting on your laurels, again, the Buffalo Bills could just not make the playoffs this year. And it wouldn't shock me because the AFC is so deep. And if you're not making moves, if you're only losing guys, I get it. They're kind of in cap hell. But I don't know. I'm very disappointed with the Buffalo Bills. I think they're going to regress. It's tough because you have a franchise quarterback in Josh Allen, but what's the reason why Diggs is still so cryptic? There's still shit going on behind the scenes with a team that's supposed to be good every year. Like, what's the reason? There's got to be something going on behind the scenes. So I'm not happy with the way the Buffalo Bills have handled offseason.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think we're just going to see another year of the Bills are going to find ways to get to the playoffs. Although there was a little bit of tumultuous offensive coordinator being released mid-season last year, but it doesn't seem like the right step in the right direction to beat elite teams. To beat Bengals when Joe Burrow's back next year, to beat Kansas City Chiefs. The AFC is tough, and I don't think they did enough to address their issues for sure.
Yeah, the draft is going to be really telling for some of these teams who, again, have the expectation every year that they're going to come in and compete, and they've just sat on their ass and done absolutely nothing. I just don't think that those same expectations can be there when you haven't improved the roster whatsoever. So Buffalo Bills, to me, are the biggest losers. The Cowboys are just losers all the time. So it's great that you pointed that out this episode. Anything else, Shovit, about the craziness of free agency before we wrap it up?
No, this has been wild. I don't know if this is if this has ever happened in the precedents, if this is like a new thing here of all these crazy changes. I think teams are just like, we got to stop the Kansas City Chiefs from being Kansas City Chiefs. And however they can do that, get players and personnel. So we'll see if they can dethrone the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to see other teams have a sense of urgency when, again, the end goal is always one thing and it's one thing only, and it's to win a championship, right? So if there's no sense of urgency to do that, then your fan base should not have those expectations and you should not create those expectations. So again, wild free agency. It's just the beginning. The draft is over a month away. Like I mentioned, next week we are doing wide receivers for the draft. I cannot wait. I am Sweetheart. That is Shove It. We're the only playbook. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Our last episode saw the most views we've ever seen on YouTube. Subscribers added to the YouTube channel, the most we've ever seen as well. So thank you so much, Arif, for joining us. Thank you to everybody that has supported us. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe, hit the like. It helps spread the word. If you're listening, you can listen to us on anywhere you find your podcast platform, socials, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. We are the only playbook. Have a fantastic week. See you guys.